So welcome to the Haunted Hacker podcast number, I don't know, Jax, I usually let my guests pick the number, so pick a number.
63 popped into my head.
Perfect. Episode
Yep.
number 63. So today we have Jax Scott on the show. I'll have her introduce herself here in a minute, go through a little bit of news and housekeeping. Really don't have to worry about the housekeeping because it's just the three of us. News, been super busy. We'll be speaking in Oklahoma City next month, also in South Africa and Cyprus this month. So stay tuned for dates on that. So Jax, it's so awesome to have you here on the show. We have a lot of similar background points, and I think it'll be a really good conversation. So why don't you introduce yourself and give a little bit of background about how you got into cyber and kind of your journey.
Absolutely, Mike. So excited to be here. I love the conversation we were having even before we hit record. So this will be a fun episode. My background is really unique in how I got into the space that I'm in today, being in really cyber threat intel and running my own firm. It started in 2008 when I went into IT while I served in the military at that time, active duty. And there wasn't cyber. So IT was working help desk, doing SharePoint, and I would do stuff like setting up network infrastructures in the middle of a field in what we called a big ass tent, a bat. And we would set up these infrastructures, we would run operations, and we'd come back. So that was kind of my background for a really long time, really on the network side. And I hated it. I despised it. I wanted out of it because they always treated IT and the G6 and S6 guys just terrible in the military. So when I had an opportunity to get out of it, it was to go to special ops. So I joined this really unique program for just women called the Cultural Support Team Program. And through that, I started getting into the intelligence world, but the physical human side of intelligence and understanding how to get information off of specifically women and children in the Middle East. And the reason we were doing that is to fill the information gap in that area. So I did that for a few years. And then what happened is I got an opportunity to go into a new branch called electronic warfare. And I became a warrant officer in that branch. And I was so happy because I was finally out of IT for a few years. And then what happened is the next thing you know, the Army had this brilliant idea to put electronic warfare under cyber command, because that makes complete sense. And the next thing you know, I am now sitting in cyber. And so that was the best and the worst thing that could have happened to me, because obviously I was thinking cyber and IT were the same thing, but they aren't. And through that experience and working in special ops, I was able to see how cyber operations play out specifically in the Eastern Europe area with our near peer adversaries. And I was able to apply my intelligence understanding, start learning about APT and threat groups in that area. And I came back, and the next thing you know, I'm in the cyber threat intel space. And fast forward a few years, I took all of that knowledge, and then being also a business owner in the past to where I'm at today, which I run my own cybersecurity advisory firm. So I assist clients with really anything they need, but we're really now in the space of governance and risk and compliance, but we can also afford them pen testing and cyber threat intel and things like that. But yeah.
That's really cool. So our similarities are pretty amazing. So I did intelligence in the military, started off with signal intelligence, and then went into the cyber warfare rate. So at one point I worked for the J6 at USGFCOM in the C&D cell. And then went on to work at Bank of America in threat management and pen testing and red teaming. So there's a whole lot of similarities with our backgrounds. And I think even today, like some of the similarities we have in current situations, I think is really interesting. So I was doing like a little bit of background, like checking out your social media and stuff like that. And I found it really interesting. So you get into the actual like weapons and stuff like that as well, which I really found fascinating. I saw some of the training that you did, and I thought it was really cool. I still do a lot of weapon stuff. I did have a Lapua 338, and long distance was my thing. I like to play AT&T and reach out and touch somebody. So tell me what it was like being in special ops as a female and part of that group, that new group that's trying to build a culture around that.
Yeah, that's such a great question, because we just had we call it our CST reunion every year. There's a small group of us that get together. And last weekend we did a Ragnar race. And I'm telling you, it's the last time I'm ever doing a Ragnar race. What a Ragnar race is, there's two, but we did the trail one. You run 16 miles, 3 different legs. And I was very fortunate that 2 of mine were in the dark, and that is complete sarcasm. And so I will say that most of our knees hurt and our hips hurt, and we're reaching an age where we're like, yeah, we're not in our 20s and 30s anymore. But the program was super unique because in 2011, we were the first team to be like volunteered. They had a team right before us that were voluntold. The military is really good at doing that. Like, hey, you will do this. And so we were selected through a paper selection process, like a packet process. And then we went through mini selection, very similar to what the SF guys go through. But it was a couple of weeks. Once you're selected through that, you go through an entire cultural training, combatives training, psychological review, everything. So that was, that in itself was shocking. But really what was shocking, Mike, was when we went out there and you deploy as a 2-man team, 2 women, and you might have an interpreter. That was the ideal environment, obviously, female interpreter, 2-man team. And you would be we were heloed in, and our stuff was dropped off from a helo, and then the helo took off, and we're in the base in the middle of nowhere, northern Afghanistan. And you're 2 women with a crew of, depending on the size of the base, 12 to 30 people. That is it. And it is, depending on your team, it's all based on the team that you land with, if they're going to be accepting you or not. And I worked with quite a few teams. We were kicked off the island several times, literally told that you're kicked off the island, go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. I remember being told by the 18 Bravo, the weapons guy, that the reason that he joined the military is so he could grow a beard and not work with people like me. And I didn't take what they were saying like negatively. I really tried to take a stance of, how would they feel? How would I feel if this was like this was the way that SF was since 1983, 1984 is when the branch was legitimately founded, but the SF was around before that, like Vietnam times. And now they have women in their ranks. And so I was really trying to take the stance of, how would I feel? But then more so, how can I become more part of the team? And so that's actually when I got into shooting. I started going out on my own. Because we had our range right there on base. I started learning electrical work. I started doing work around base. I started trying to cook, whatever I could to be part of the team. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't easy. You definitely had to be thick-skinned. A lot of the women didn't succeed in the same way because they didn't know how to go into an environment that didn't foster diversity and wasn't a fan of you. It didn't matter what types of skills that you brought, you were a woman. That's a lot of times what happened. So the experience was rewarding, but it was still a very, very challenging experience. But I would definitely do it all over again if I had the opportunity. For sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. Some of those FOBs can be really interesting too, as far as embedded culture and the people that are there. So yeah, like that kind of experience, I kind of equate it to what it was like for women to get into IT and cyber. Especially in industry right now. I mean, you still have that whole issue of women in cyber and really having to fight for, respect and stuff like that. And I've always been a big advocate for women in cyber because I think it takes both mindsets, both the male and female way of thinking, because we do think distinctly differently. But I think it takes both mindsets to make a good picture. And I think that's important, but there's a lot of, old timers and old schoolers that don't necessarily think that way and make it very difficult. Have you experienced that same type of struggle in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I have. And it's really unfortunate, Mike, because I think that I thought it was going to be different when I left full-time military and I came into this sector. I thought it couldn't be like, in the SF, it couldn't be that closed off, that closed-minded. It is. Is it as bad? No, but it's still happening. But what I have found, it's really dependent on the organization, but even more so, because you can have organizational culture, but really it drills down to the team level and the manager and the leader of that team. And for me, if I do not feel that I am being seen or I'm being heard as part of the team, then I would move on. Because it's really hard to change the leadership and the culture of that environment. But what you can do is take yourself out of that situation. And that's actually what I did. And that was one of the other reasons why I launched my company, is because I wanted to create my own environment. But I also am a huge advocate for uplifting women in this industry. And so not only did I create my own company and just say, okay, I'm going to just do this again, but then I started reaching out to other women to start trying to uplift them, to bring them into the community and help mentor and mentee them, because I never had a female mentor in this space. And the ones that I wanted, it was as if, not that it was like a competition. And I didn't
Right.
understand that either in this space, where in the military, I never had that opportunity to even have a female mentor. So
Mm.
coming into this space, I'm like, oh, that would be easy. I mean, I'm a woman, they're a woman, they've already made it. They're going to definitely want to uplift me. That's actually not what I've incurred in this arena. It's more of a competition with the upper line executive women. So that was also disheartening to me.
Yeah, and that's really strange too, because I would think that, being that in the beginning of cyber there were very few females in the industry, I would have thought that they would have bonded together and helped each other out. But I guess it's that, I've made my way and I don't want to risk anything, so I'm going to keep everything to myself. And it's funny because in the cybersecurity industry, what I found is a lot of the old school thinking comes from the fact that a lot of cyber is populated by ex-military, and that same mentality still carries over into cybersecurity. And even in the space that I work in, there's still a lot of that thinking, especially with outsiders that are coming in, people who are coming from other industries, and people with different backgrounds. I've struggled a little bit with my background as far as the hacking stuff and stuff like that. I actually had a CPA firm turn me down for a consulting engagement because of the fact that I was affiliated in my past with a hacking group. And I thought, that's so narrow thinking, but
Mhm.
it is what it is. I just, like you, I just move on and go to the next stop. Um, so like the best people that I've talked to so far in my talks that I give are the women in cybersecurity groups. They're so hungry for information, and they respect when people come and share that with them. I think the groups I've spoken to, especially in Kansas, have been like extraordinary. Do you speak at some of those women in cybersecurity groups and conferences, or what do you mainly focus on when you give talks?
Yeah, I actually want to speak at one of the WICs that are coming up, but to be fully transparent, I am so saturated this year that I know that they have the proposals open right now, and I'm like, oof, I don't even know if I can take on another one. But what I'm a huge fan of is Security, and I spoke last year at Security. I love Deidre Diamond. She's amazing. She's a huge advocate for women in this space. Absolutely adore her. I actually had her on our podcast, and I was reaching out to her about Security and for the talk this year, and I actually just I didn't even submit my proposal because I was just overloaded. But I love doing those, the female specific ones. And then I like VetSecCon, Veteran Security Conference. I love that one. I love supporting Tom and that team. So that's another area. What I don't like doing are the really, really big ones that have turned into more like RSAs, that have turned more into
Vendor
vendor.
space, yeah.
Yeah, I try to actually avoid those. I'm not there to be on stage to get recognized. Instead, I want to do engagements with the community of individuals that are hungry to learn and to connect and to thrive as a community. So I really focus on those speaking engagements.
Yeah, I do too. I don't like the big ones that are vendor specific, because I
No.
don't take a vendor stance or, side with any vendors. As a matter of fact, most of my talks are talking about how vendors are failing the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
So I'm not welcome at those large ones, I don't think, because of that. So you worked at, what did you say, Capital One?
I did. Yeah, I worked there for a year. It's
Yeah.
great.
So what was that experience like? Because I worked for Bank of America for a couple of years, and I have my own thoughts on the banking industry. But tell me what your experience was like.
Well, oh, so that was so I did FireEye right before that, and then I did that. So that was from going from military, because most of my background has been military or running my own DoD company. And it was my second corporate job. And if you've worked in banking, you know that there were a lot of politics. And even before I got hired on, I was actually contracted in. So I worked at Capital One, but I was hired by a contracting company. So the contracting guy worked for the agency and really cool dude. And he was like, hey, there's going to be a lot of politics. And I was like, yeah, I'm like, Mike, I'm like, yeah, no big deal. And then, but my director at Capital One, prior military agency guy, really cool dude. He was like, hey, there's going to be a lot of politics. And I'm like, okay, like still, I'm not fully comprehending it. Yeah, I figured it out within it probably took me about 4 to 6 weeks. Oh, I figured it out. And it was almost a blowout on a Slack channel between me and another guy about actually TA 505 and arguing about TA 505. And then me doing a brief. And since I wasn't Intel, I was Fusion. He got upset because I outbriefed him, is what happened, because they were Intel and I did a better Intel brief. Again, politics. I didn't realize, because I thought we're all a team. Like, I'm just providing additional data for us to reach the end goal. Yeah, I got pulled off to the side by my manager because it went to like director level and back to my manager about what I had did. And I was blown away. So through that experience, I can tell you it was one of the best learning experiences I have ever had. I had a great boss that was understanding, that was like, hey, I get that your heart's in the right place, but here's like the environment here. And so from that point on, I was a little hurt. I will say my ego was a little damaged. I like took a step back, licked my wounds. And then I'm like, all right, I got this. I'm going to understand politics. So for the next like 10, 11 months, I just figured it out. And it was a great experience. I helped build their fusion center from the ground up with an amazing team. I was actually just talking to them yesterday. They reached out to me. So I didn't want to leave. I had a great opportunity. And so I pivoted, but yeah, it was a learning experience. How was your experience there? Because mine was, it's a very interesting dynamic, especially just in Capital One. I don't know if that's across the board in banking, but I was like, whoo.
Yeah. So my experience was almost identical to yours. Actually, I started at Bank of America as a contractor. And I was doing their vulnerability management, which basically was running Foundstone and reporting which ones are like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever. So I left and then came back as a full-time employee on the risk management team and threat management. And we had people on the team that were ex-OSI. We had one guy that was special forces, human intelligence. We had multiple people from the military, and then a couple business, entrepreneurs that came on. The same thing, we would come up with this detailed structure of a specific group, and it was accepted by some people and rebuked by others, and it was that whole political game.
Yeah.
But my experience was a little bit different, as when I left, I put in my resignation, and it was about bonus time, right? And the reason why I put in my resignation is because I knew that the FBI had started an investigation. And I wanted to leave the bank because a lot of the stuff had to do with Occupy Wall Street and some of the groups I was with. So when I resigned, they actually gave me a huge bonus. It was like 60 grand to stay.
Wow.
Yeah, they basically wanted me to stay. And I was like, you just don't understand. I can't stay. Like, things are going to happen. And I just got to go. But the experience I had, like, the bank was so siloed, right? They have the risk management, and then they have threat management, and those two people don't talk. And the credit carding, the people who are in charge of the credit cards, like, they don't want to talk to threat management or risk management. Like, it was just really strange. That was my first experience with a very siloed environment where politics ruled, other than the military, because we all know in the military, everything is siloed. And, there's always a fight for need to know and all that stuff. But yeah, it was really interesting. And looking back then, and some of the threat intel that I was gathering and getting into different groups, they were really proactive. And it's probably the most proactive industry, in my opinion, when it comes to security and threat management. Even some of the industrial companies I've seen really don't go in that deep as far as the financials did. So yeah, it was really, really interesting. And now you talk about the threat actors. That's one of my favorite topics because I've been so involved in that space for so long, and looking at psychological profiles, and each group is different and motivations are different. Just off the top of your head, what is your favorite APT group and why?
Oh, probably TA505. And the reason why I liked them so much is because nobody knows actually who they are per se. You know,
Mm,
that you have these assumptions that they could be Russia. And a lot of people think possibly it's a part of APT 28 or 29. But when you really start like actually doing the research and sitting down and peeling that layer and unpacking TA505, you don't know who they're associated with. And if anything, my belief is I think that behind the scenes, there's a couple of different nexuses that make up TA505. So I find what they do really fascinating, and it's just really hard to create attribution of who actually is that group. Yeah.
yeah, they're really interesting, and they're like the cicada 303s of the dark world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought that was a pretty cool comparison. I love cicada 303, by the way. But yeah, the different threat actors are really interesting. We were talking about IOCs and some of the different methods that these groups employ, and I've seen some really unique stuff. Um, but one thing I don't think people understand is a lot of the ransomware that we see is regenerated and
Mhm.
not necessarily used for the same purpose. And I've come to a theory, and I think it's pretty close to actual fact, is that a lot of these groups are hired by nation state actors, a lot of the lower level ransomware groups, and they deploy their ransomware, and they use the veil of we want money, but really behind it all is a more intelligence gathering, sort of like China did back in the days of the VA when they exfiltrated data to build dossiers on specific individuals. And I think that that's currently going on today, and I think they're targeting specific industries for that purpose specifically. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're spot on. I think that right now we're in a really interesting and dynamic place within the cyberspace. And
Mm,
I think so because um, we are advancements in technology. If we are just looking from the United States and we look at the advancement of technology like IoT devices, we're going to be, it's going to be 3 times as many IoT devices on our networks by 2024. And then we just look at machine learning and artificial intelligence and those devices that are going to be coming out, and then don't even get started on quantum computing. Just looking at that right there, well, we have to consider that our adversaries have the same capabilities, if not better. And so thinking that these attacks that we're going to see right now are going to be the same in the next year to 2 years, that's ludicrous. It's not. They're still maturing, and I feel like sometimes at a faster rate than we are for our offensive cyber operations, and they're becoming more creative and smarter for their approaches. And what I believe is happening and has already been happening for quite a long time is the collections piece. And that's not just through the networks. Let's look at these devices, these mobile devices. Where's most of our chips and our electronic and our devices being made and being brought into the United States? And I'm not talking about, I don't want to think anybody think I'm talking about conspiracy, but let's think we have an adversary, a known adversary that makes these devices, but we trust them 110% that they would not put anything on a BIOS of a computer system that they could at some point in time turn on and start collecting information off of us. We truly believe that they would never do anything like that. Okay, I don't though. So I think that this collection has been going on for quite some time. I think that they're becoming more creative and they're using different TTPs to make it happen. And you're just speaking about one of the many. And so I would not be surprised if we see something in the future that is, we're in a collection posture right now. And it's, we see it in the military, I forget what it's called, where you do all your collections before you go out there. It's the pattern, not pattern of life, but it's the same thing that they're doing. I can't think of the name of it. And
mhm.
if I think of it, I'll say it. But yeah, it's understanding your environment and your pattern of life, and you're creating your intelligence picture. That's what they're doing. And then eventually there'll be accumulating events that'll happen, or there'll be multiple events to lead up to that event. So I absolutely am. Yeah, I agree with you 100% that is what's happening right now. And it's quite frightening. And it's one of the things that definitely keep me up at night thinking
Yeah,
about it.
most definitely. I mean, you look at like the past problems we've had. Let's say Huawei, right? I
Yeah.
mean, the DoD and government were actually buying Huawei equipment and putting them in place, and then finding out later, oh shit, our information is going back to China.
Yeah.
And then just recently, the DJI drones, we all knew that the information was going back to China, including imagery, geolocation, flight patterns, all that stuff. And who bought those drones? The Secret Service. It's like, I mean, come on,
Yeah.
let's get
Yeah.
on the same page. But a lot of people too, they fight me on this, the fact that the things that we see other countries doing, they tend to believe that our country does not do that.
Mhm.
And I try to explain to them that we've been disrupting elections for eons, trying to throw coups and get people out of government. We have our own cyber attack army. We actually have commercial businesses that have malware creation labs. So this is legit. Like, we're playing part of the game. We're not innocent. And this is the wars that used to be fought on battlefields are now moving to the ethereal realm. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that, cat and mouse, cloak and dagger type activity. But what I find really interesting is China is as far as nation states go, I think they're the most interesting to me, because if you're a company and you build a facility in China to save on, marketing and industrial costs, 2 days later, across the street may be your same company, but with a Chinese name. But we continue to do that over and over and over again. I used to work for NEC Unified, and NEC opened up a plant in China. And shortly thereafter, China had their own NEC company that's producing the same phones. So it's one of those things where do we draw the line? I know that we need foreign relations. I know that we need, trade back and forth. But at some point, we have to draw a line and say, look, this is enough. You've already stole most of our data. You're replicating our facilities and costing the US and the citizens money. So at what point do we cut that off? And I don't know strategically if we ever can. And what are your thoughts on that?
That is it goes back to politics. So that's where I think we can, but it's the relationship, because we could sever and there could be a lot of fallout by doing a cutoff, using China, for example, for our imports and exports, especially with electronics. But that's an area, or technology, anything, that's an area that I am really passionate about. I'm studying about it, the cyber law, the policy, the direction that we're going as a country.
Mm-hmm.
Something has to be done. Even if we create friction, we have got to cut that tie. We have to, and we have to start keeping things not only internal, but we've got to have a way of doing quality assurance on the products that we put into our federal system specifically. So what does that look like? Like CMMC, the Cyber Maturity Model Certification, and vetting all our third-party vendors. So we're going to do that. But what about the Chinese companies where we buy our equipment in? They're not going to be CMMC certified? How's that going to look? So maybe that's our way, the government's way of going around that, where they cut them off. I don't know. That's such an onion right there, Mike. It's like, we have to do something about it, though, because technology isn't going away. It's only going to become more complex. And with that complexity, as you know, becomes more vectors to exploit, and we don't even know what those are going to look like yet. We haven't even crossed that bridge yet into that new technological world that we're moving into. I mean, we're in 5G right now. They're already talking about 6G, and we haven't even finished putting up the towers and the equipment and being able to fully leverage that capability. And we're already moving into 6G. It's crazy. It's wild.
And 6G terrestrial, when you look at Elon Musk going to satellite, at what point is that going to become an issue? I think it already has, but it hasn't been put out in the public yet. But I think that the whole satellite realm and space is going to be another attack vector. But yeah, going back to the financial industry and vendor audits and stuff like that, I know that back in 10 years ago, we had at Bank of America, we were doing vendor security audits. Like, that was a thing, because we had to make sure that our vendors and third parties were secure, because we were getting stuff from them. But that's just now coming into view as a whole through every industry. And it's like, you guys are like 10 years behind.
Mhm.
And it blows me away. And even in the military, like everybody thinks that the military has the most advanced weapons and weapon systems, but that's not always true, you know. And when you look at cyber, like we didn't even think about going to the cyber realm to combat until like 2003, 2004, when a lot of these countries were already there.
Mhm.
So playing catch up is really hard to do. So in your personal life, Jax, tell me what your passion is and what you enjoy doing outside of cybersecurity, because to me, you know, balance is super important. And I don't seem to have a lot of it lately because of our ransomware gangs and their shenanigans. But what is your passion outside of cybersecurity?
That's so great. I love this because this morning, I was laying in bed because my knees and hips still hurt from this Ragnar. So I did not go to the gym. So instead, I was on my phone looking at the tallest peak in Costa Rica. So I've decided that I love hiking. I love hiking. Like I did the rim to rim. I was getting ready to do Kilimanjaro. That was one thing I was really good at, put a whole bunch of weight on my back and I could go for miles and miles at a really ridiculous pace. And so I've decided that I'm just going to start flying into countries and climbing like the highest peak. Now, I don't have any desire to do the tallest peak in the world or anything crazy like that. But like Kilimanjaro, Costa Rica has like a 12,000 foot peak, which is that's not anything for me because I used to do the 14ers in Colorado. So
Nice.
hiking. But I need to find better balance, Mike. I admit it. I in school full time. I run a company. I have a YouTube channel. I do podcasts and I mentor. And there are times where, yeah, I get a little wonky. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just my OCD. And then having a TBI, you just like I hyper focus into stuff sometimes a little
Oh
too
yeah.
unhealthy. Yeah,
Yeah.
as you know. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. I
yeah.
experienced that actually in Baltimore. I was debriefing the NSA on some stuff and went out into Baltimore and went to an ATM. And after I left the ATM, I went to dinner, me and a Marine. I came out of the restaurant and got mugged by like 5 people
Oh
and
my God.
got a TBI from it. Um, and it does cause you to be like hyper focused on certain. I get down to the minutia,
Yeah.
and I get so rabbit holed in that minutia that time escapes me. And before I know it, I've spent 12 hours working on something very small. So balance is super important. So there's no Mount Everest in your future.
I've I'm kind of one of those people too that if everybody else does it, I have no desire to do it. And
Right.
it's gotten so publicized and people die too. And it costs like 50,000, maybe one day. I'm not going to rule it out, but it's definitely because of that, it's not on my bucket list. I also want to do hikes that like 13, 14, 19,000 feet. Those are all enjoyable
Oh yeah.
and I don't really have to train too much. I can stay in like my natural shape and go do it. But Everest, I mean, that's a lot. That's a year commitment of training, and I don't know. We'll
For
see what happens.
sure. For
I don't want
sure.
to rule anything out. I never say absolute, so we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah. I love hiking, almost to the point of death. So I got my pace.
Yes, I'm the same way.
I got my pacemaker put in 2017, I think, so
Yeah,
around that time frame. And a week later, I was rucking with a 40-pound sack, 12 miles.
you're
And
crazy. Yes.
I ended up having to go to the hospital because my potassium level was so dangerously low. But let me tell you, getting a potassium IV without being diluted is horrible. It's the most excruciating pain in the world. It feels like 100 hornets are stinging you.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. All
Yeah.
over your body?
Through your veins, like your
Oh,
veins.
geez.
Yeah. So
Holy.
it's
Wow.
dangerous to do that. So anybody watching and you want to go on a hike, make sure you drink water and take a banana or something, and
Yeah.
don't do 12 miles with a 40-pound sack after being in the hospital for like a week. Bad
That's what
idea.
I was just gonna say that. That's probably what the kicker was. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, I always tell people I like to hike till death sometimes. And they're like, why would I hike with you then? But I don't know. It feels so good. Like I try to find, if I'm in Colorado, I try to find, if I only have a few hours, I try to find on all trails the hardest hike, shortest distance. And I'll usually try to do a peak and go straight up or something. And people are like, I don't understand. But like you, it's like, I don't know. It's the heart's racing, you're exhausted. Yeah, your
Yeah.
knee, like legs, my knees don't usually hurt, but my legs are like tight. I think that's just our sick military minds. I don't
Keep
know.
pushing. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
And even in the military, like I had problems with my right knee. I was working, doing some training with a fast company, and we were doing dune runs, like sand runs.
Oh my God, those are the worst.
Uh,
Oh,
horrible. And I twisted my knee and I thought it was all over with. I was on PT for like 6 months. And then I was on crutches for like 2. And I got through the military, got out of the military, and almost immediately had 2 ACL replacements. So I had apparently torn my ACL in the military, and they just kind of overlooked it. But yeah, like the whole push mentality, like there is no stopping, I think is what drives me. And that drives me in business too. Like I find myself doing that on an average workday, especially working on ransomware incident response. It's like it can be a 24-hour day job. And people sometimes have to tell me, hey, look, I've got this for a couple hours. Why don't you go get some rest? Because
yeah.
they can tell when I reach that point where I'm exhausted, because I no longer am the fun guy and I'm more of the let's just get shit done and quit bullshitting.
Mhm.
And then the military really comes out. So I try to keep that hidden as much as possible. So
What do
tell me,
you do? I
what
want to
do I
know
do?
what you do to keep balance in your life. Like, because
Oh,
we have similar personalities, I can tell. So yeah, when do you feel like I'm starting to get burned out? I need to take some time and take a step back.
so I get that from a couple fronts, right? I get that burnout from my job. I get that burnout from the community I started, the haunted hacker community. And there's certain things that go on, and I have to tone them out, because if I don't, then I'm going to obsess about it, and people are not going to be happy. Recently, I was just ready to throw the band hammer on everybody, because I was just burned out. But what I do personally for that, and it sounds really silly, but I do a lot of meditation, a lot of mindfulness, putting myself in the present, trying to stay that way. And also, I make candles. I know that sounds really weird, but I do a lot of essential oil candles. I call it the cyber escape candle, because I think it helps. When I work, sometimes I'll light a candle, and it kind of gives me that balance. I think mentally, it gives me a balance. But I also do like fly fishing. Just recently went into the rivers of North Carolina and did some fly fishing.
That's
Literally,
awesome.
literally almost went down the river. I fell off of a rock that was off of the water about 3 feet onto my back and started sliding into the river. And I thought, oh, this is it. I'm going to die fly fishing.
Oh my God.
But I do that. And
I would love to learn fly fishing. Was that hard to learn? It looks difficult. I need to just go take a class or something.
I didn't even do that. So my fly fishing started out in Yellowstone. When I was younger, I worked in Yellowstone during the summers, and I lived in the park. I lived in Canyon
Oh, that's cool.
Village. Yeah. And so I saw these guys out there fly fishing, and I had just seen the movie or River Runs Through It. And I
Mhm.
thought that looks calming and it looks like something very fulfilling. So I went out and just taught myself how to do it, bought a rod. And, before I knew it, I was not only casting, but I was also tying my own flies depending on the hatch of the environment and time of year. And there's nothing better than creating a fly, like tying your own fly and going out and using that fly and catching a fish on it. Like
Yeah.
to me that's epic, because
Mhm.
you've understood the fish, you've understood the environment, and you have something to show for it. Other than that, just I like hiking. I now live in the mountains of Tennessee, uh,
Mm,
and
I
it's
love
just
Tennessee. Oh, yeah.
so I live in Chattanooga, so it's not a big city, but it's not
Yeah,
a little city.
right.
But yeah, just the environment. I think breaking away from the city every once in a while and just like enjoying the outdoors, that to me is key, because going back to military days, like that's the environment that I thrive in. And in nature, I can be alone and I can have all the morons quieted and there's nobody talking. Because I also have Asperger's. And so I get overwhelmed by a lot of things.
Mhm.
So it's important for me to break away and isolate and calm things down every once in a while. But yeah, our personalities are definitely similar. I've also I had started my own company at one point and about to start another one. So tell me what it was like for you, Jax, to start up your own company and get it going. Because that to me, with our mindset, that is really interesting and important, I think.
Yeah. So the first time, so I started my own company at 19. So that was my first entrepreneur. So it was always kind of part of me. I was hustling perfume out of the trunk of my car at 19 years old. So I did that for about a year right before I joined the military. So I just had that entrepreneur spirit. But when I really launched a firm, it was a DoD contracting firm, women owned, veteran owned, that whole thing, you know, NICS codes, all that. And it was focused in the intelligence space, physical intelligence, to provide, and I say physical intelligence, like we provided physical beings and personnel, women operators that had 10 plus years experience, either in the military or elite law enforcement SWAT personnel. And we would provide um, on ground support to embed, for example, we had an operation where I had a team of women that would embed in the eco-terrorist cells that were trying to vandalize the DAPL pipeline, the oil pipeline back in 2016, right after Trump had been elected. There was a whole bunch of vandalization, and a lot of these eco-terrorist cells were starting to set up camp in the indigenous areas, and they were trying to stop the laying of the pipeline. And so I had a company that hired us, and so we provided early warning and intelligence and stuff. It was a challenge because I was a token woman, a token company working again in a very male dominated area. Most of the companies I worked for were like triple cannabis stuff. So very alpha male special op guys. And it was really hard to get work. I had a business partner at the time that it was not the most ideal environment. I learned a great deal from him, but I realized that I didn't know what I didn't know about business, and he wasn't teaching me everything. So there was a lot of things that in a way I got taken advantage of, but that wasn't his fault. It was because I was not knowledgeable about what was past performance and how to do certain things on contracts, all this stuff. So in 2018, due to bad decisions, not assessing and taking care of my PTSD from deployment, all these things, Mike, I went homeless. I lost everything. My business partner and I split ways the first part of 2018. And I was really determined to be like, you know what, I'm going to show you I don't need you. I can do all these things. Well, at the same time, I had really toxic friends. I was internally going through my own trauma, but that was the point in time where I hit rock bottom, running my company. I mean, I hit it hard, and I like started digging. So I had an opportunity. A friend of mine, Sergeant Major, reached out and said, "Hey, we have a deployment 2019 going to Eastern Europe. Love to have you on it." Literally didn't even give me a choice. He's like, "You're coming on as the cyber warrant officer." And so I had nothing else really going on. I was living on the floor of my friend's house, and I said, "Okay, let's do it." And I closed my business doors and I made it happen. And that was the turning point in my life, because I was finally able, like you said, about getting into nature. Well, that was kind of my breakaway, get rid of the noise, start over. I had a steady paycheck. I I really put my head down in business books, podcasts. And then I sat there and I said, what do I not like about my current environment? And how do I change it? And I did this huge shift in my life. And so when I decided to relaunch my company this summer of this year, it was not planned. It was, but it wasn't. I was working for a company that it turned out they did not have the budgetary. They didn't have the budget in place for me after they had just hired me on, and I was released from the company. I was laid off, and as soon as that happened, Mike, that was the summer of this year. I was sitting right here in this desk. The HR woman didn't even turn on her camera when she told me that I was laid off. They
Wow.
didn't give me an explanation outside of just, we have budgetary restrictions. And it was a shitty feeling. And a lot of PTSD came back, like being homeless and everything. But instead of me sitting there and feeling sorry for myself, I sat there for about 5 minutes and I'm like, okay, and I recognize this sucks. This is a crappy situation to be in. But I'm a lot better, and I'm in a much better place than I was in 2018. And the first thing I thought was, you're going to run your own company. You can do this. And I literally went on LinkedIn. I changed my title. I put my company name back up there. My company was still, my LLC and everything was still active. Changed it all. And I started making phone calls to CEOs that I knew in the space to let them know that my company, I didn't tell them what happened. I just said, my company's up and running. This is the space we're in. Love to do work with you. And then I reached out to a dear friend of mine and I said, as soon as I called him, he answered and he said, well, I called him that afternoon. So that evening, so I'd been planning and doing all this stuff. And that evening I called him and first thing he said, well, looks like you have some extra time on your hands, huh? And I was like, thanks, Joe. And he's like, hey, he gave me some suggestions. He said, CMMC is a big space. I will support you on the back end. He has a big firm. He's like, bring in clients, we'll support. And the next thing you know, I did a hard pivot. And I will tell you, I've already landed one contract. We just submitted a proposal. Actually, you're submitting it this afternoon for a possible second contract. And I believe and I have faith that not only will my company maybe be wildly successful, but my life will completely change. And it's because this time around, I not only had the right network and the right friends and the right circle around me, but it was my mindset of going into this differently. So you have to fall, like business, like you have to fall, you have to learn, because there were so many things I was doing wrong the first time I ran my company. But now today I'm in a really healthy space. So I'm really excited about Outpost Gray and myself and like the direction. Yeah.
That's really awesome. It sounds really good. And, kudos to you for bringing it back up and starting over again. When I came back to the US last October, actually a year ago, almost to the date, I came back to the US with 60 pounds that the UK government gave me to fly back and be repatriated. Had no place to go. Literally was homeless on a drastic scale, had no money to my name, had no job, nothing. I was literally deported, sort of escorted back to the US, and had to start all over again. I had to find a place to live. I had to find a job. And with my background, it was very difficult because of the things I'd done in my past. But, there's a certain sense of accomplishment when you reach that very bottom and you're able to bring yourself up to a point where, hey, I feel normal again. Because I don't know about you when you were homeless and dealing with all that, but I felt less than human. It was like, I'm back in the country that I'm supposed to be, a citizen of, and I can't get a bank account. I don't have a place to live, no money, no job. This was not my choice to come back, so what do? I was so baffled. But luckily I had a friend of mine from high school that gave me a place to live. And I lived with him for a good while, almost a year. And just recently branched off and started getting a bank account. Even though I can only have like a savings account, it's not like a real account. I'm starting to rebuild myself. And one thing that helped me was the podcast, talking to others and hearing their story and how, they became who they are and what steps they took to get there. And that helped me a lot because in my mind, I was so lost. I was like, what do I do now? Like I knew I couldn't stop. I had to keep going because that's the whole mantra of, what I've done for the past 20 years. But it was like, but which way do I go? And so the idea of starting a company is really appealing. At one point, I thought I was going to turn the podcast into a company itself, but I'm not so sure of that. I think, I've always wanted to give back to the community. I always have. That's been my point since I've been released by the FBI and kind of let go. I think the next step for me is starting another company. And you and I shortly talked about it before we started recording. Giving back to me is what that means to me is going after groups that are taking away from small businesses, from companies, and making people's lives miserable. And ransomware is one of those things. So look for an anti-ransomware group to pop up in the short future to actively go after ransomware groups. So I won't say how we're going to do that, but it's going to get ugly really quick. And that's just how I operate. I like to shock and awe and just take things over. Yeah. I think it's really cool where you came from. And I read the whole story about, how you were homeless and how you built yourself back up. And that's one of the main reasons why I wanted you on the show, not just because you have an amazing background, but you have a real story, like a personal story. A lot of people, jump into the industry and, they're CEOs or they come from a business background. They've not had any real struggle because they haven't been outside the US. Those of us have been in the military and seen what it's like in other countries. It's a huge thing to have to build yourself back up. A lot of these people haven't had that experience. And I think that's where the mindset of helping people out comes from. I think that's pretty inherent with anybody that goes into the military. So Jax, I super appreciate you being on the show. And I think at some point we should do some collaboration. I think that we have similar mindsets and I think we could produce something really cool. Anything else you want to add before we shut down the podcast?
I have a question for you before we shut it down. Yeah. So
Sure.
I am super interested because, your background, and we're going to have you on our podcast, Hackers and Hexens, because we're very similar in that of being able to, we have a podcast to be able to allow people a platform to share their stories.
Sure.
And I'm curious from your background and where you're at today, if there are individuals right now that are like struggling to get in this space and I had somebody message me. I don't know her at all. She messaged me on LinkedIn late last night. I saw it this morning and she's so desperate and she can't get a job. She's applied and all these things. And being in those desperate places, it can seem like endless. So is there advice that you would give to somebody to help them through that where they're at in their life? Like maybe it's breaking into the industry, or maybe there's in a place like where we've been where it's like, yeah, is this ever going to end?
Yeah, so I do have some advice about that, and I had to teach myself and learn from my own advice when I went through that situation. First of all, you have to be in a good mental state, right? You have to be okay. You have to be faithful in what you're doing and project that that's going to happen. You have to almost like put yourself in a position where you have a job, you're associated in industry, and you're moving up. You have to view yourself that way. Once you start projecting that, it comes to you. But the main point is you have to be mentally okay. You have to have some sort of routine, and you can't quit. I've had so many doors shut in my face because of my background or because of other things. And you just can't stop at that. You can't let that shut you down. You have to believe in yourself and you have to keep moving. And among other things is you have to maintain relationships. And I preach about this all the time. Cybersecurity is not about the ones and zeros. It's not about the new techniques, the new tactics, the new hacking tools. It's all about people and relationships. If you can build relationships and maintain them, then things will work out. You'll have positive results. But the moment you start isolating yourself and not reaching out to other people and not giving back just something, and it doesn't have to be something affiliated with cybersecurity, but just giving back and getting out of yourself when you feel low makes things so much better and so much easier. And I try to do that all the time. If someone contacts me and says, hey, I want to become a pen tester, what do I do? Well, you've already done the first thing. You've already identified what you want to do. Now it's just building a path and seeing yourself in that position. And today, I talk about this a lot too, is today, the people getting into the industry, there are so many resources. I started out when BBSs were around and there were no resources and knowledge was kind of tribal and guarded. Yep. So but now with Google and Hack the Box and all kinds of resources, it's easy to go out and teach yourself those skills. But yeah, that'd be my advice, and reach out to other people. And a major thing, yeah, and a major thing too is like once you get in that spot and you start burning out and you start feeling low, reach out to somebody, because we have a huge issue in this industry with mental health. I've lost several friends because of suicide. So that would be it.
Well, you're the best. Thank you, Mike. This was wonderful.
I really enjoyed it, and I definitely think that we have to do it again. And I wish you the best with your company. And if you need any help with anything, let me know, and I'll do what I can.
Yeah, and Haunted and Hacker community, be prepared for Mike and I to be doing some collab work in the future. Be awesome. Stay tuned.
Awesome. All right, Jax, have a good day, and thank you for your time today, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.